And we're live with our 162nd episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode. We're super excited to have Mike with us again today. It's been a long time, even though we talk to Mike all the time. We just haven't had him on the podcast. So we're excited to get his take on cloud security and other items, right? I did want to mention KernelCon training one more time. KernelCon's about a month away. The class is filling up. I've been getting emails from the organizers basically telling us, hey, there are registrations that are happening. So if anyone is interested, we'll pop the link in the show notes as well about kernelcon.org training. It's in Omaha, the end of March. But that's the first time we're excited to be there again. Otherwise, we have a really, prescient warning from the FBI about QR codes that Mike was telling us about. Mike, what was happening there?
Well, I mean, kind of a minor thing at the Super Bowl where a QR code popped up. I do love the fact that they used a DVD, like the
bouncing
display.
Yeah.
That was like a throwback to The Office. Yeah, right on time. Was it 2 weeks since the Super Bowl? They made sure to tell everyone not to do what everyone just did by scanning the QR code and opening it. I'm pretty sure like 3 people in my family were like, okay, let me just get this going real quick. During that advertisement.
Well, didn't
on your Wi-Fi network?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it crashed Coinbase too, right? Like they were having a hard problem dealing with the traffic. So
yeah,
Coinbase has not had. Oh my God, did you see that Coinbase had a $250,000 bounty paid out for the ability to still unlimited cryptocurrency?
Yeah,
I don't.
Yeah, it still seems pretty low. That's a good bounty, but that still seems pretty low compared to what that person could have done had they used it.
Yeah, no kidding. We saw that we talked about it. I don't know which episode, but it was recent where it was 350 million stolen Bitcoin, and they're like, "Well, we'll give you 10 million if you give it back to us. So tell us how you did it."
And a T-shirt.
Pizza party. Yeah. So, but I personally, I use Coinbase. I like Coinbase. So, hope things shake out well for them in the end.
I'm sticking to gold, good old gold. Just bullion in the basement,
Silver and nickels.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just keep it. You can just keep in bullion bricks down in the old basement.
Yeah. The basement looks like from Die Hard 2. So. Just like that.
Off topic, would you mind posting your address just for everybody on the chat?
Sure. I'm in Gainesville, Virginia.
Give away my address. Awesome.
Yeah.
Oh. Times. And anyway, if you can't tell, we've known Mike for a number of years. We all work together at a consulting firm that shall not be named. For a number of years together, and since then we've been good friends. I think it's time to go back to Austin is really what I think, right?
Yes.
DevSecCon 2019,
Scooters.
right? Scooters. Was it 2019?
Don't drink and scooter or do if you want to have a good time. Potentially fall down, but whatever.
Yeah. Watch out for curbs.
Watch out for curbs. We actually had somebody asking us to go down to Austin, Seth. I forget who, but somebody was asking for us to go down there. I was like, well, we just need a conference that it makes sense to train at, and we'll be down there.
Yep. Yeah. And we've been having discussions. How am I the one to mention that Lokomokosek is back and actually has a date?
And you know what it is?
I do. It's only taken me 3-4 years. It's like June 27th through the 30th.
Yeah. Nice.
Yes.
So,
Oahu, right? Is that correct?
Awesome. Yeah. Yep. So that'll be good. Those of us that can make it will be there. I don't know. We were talking about the organizers about doing like a code review workshop or something along those lines. I don't know what that'll look like, Ken, or if it'll happen.
Yeah, I should be able to make it now that I understand. Like, I think I had some confusion on, requirements there and everything. But yeah, I should be able to make that one. So yeah, it'll be a lot of fun, man. I love Lokomokosek. It was, and just to put it out there, there's going to be, I think, daycare for those traveling with families during the day. So you'll have some daycare available if you want to bring up. They actually really do promote the conference as like a family-friendly event. I know, Mike, you brought out Benny, I brought out Max, and we just, it was a good time. Like, kids were in the pool, and then during the day we got to see our. The one track was awesome because like you didn't have to choose. You get to see like great speakers all in one place, and there's only one track. And then afterwards, you just go to the pool and get some drinks and hang out with the family. It was great.
Yeah, it's a super awesome conference. Really good content too. Like, they had every single talk was really good that year.
It's probably because I wasn't there, so just just be prepared. The level is going to lower as Anyway,
Seth tries to lower the level. He says,
"Yes.
Declass.
Take the lower. I advise everyone else to take the high road, so I can take the low road. No one else is on it. That kind of."
No, Wahoo should be pretty fun. I think that there's a lot of. I think there's a cheesecake factory. No, I'm joking.
Wow, it's blowing up over there.
Get some jalapeno poppers and.
Oh wow!
What are we talking about?
we have devolved this week. Thanks to everyone that's listening. Yeah.
This is like a crappy travel podcast now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna rate the chicken fingies. We'll get Justin on to rate the chicken fingies. The different
chicken fingies, yes.
Establishment. Good times.
Sweet time.
Well, hey, I did want to follow up with something real quick, by the way. You remember that you remember the Missouri website that was basically just like putting people's social security numbers and HTML comments and all that, or whatever it was? I don't know, something like that. Basically, if you just look at the source of the HTML the HTML source of the page, you'd see is like unencrypted SSNs or something like that. Anyways, the prosecutors have decided not to file charges, it sounds like, for that reporter. So I think that's a good step, or a step in the right direction. Good step. So thumbs up. Positive news.
Someone showed them how to right click, and they were like, "Oh, all right, we don't have a case here."
They're like, so basically, I'm a hacker now, is what you're saying.
Yeah, one prosecutor is going to charge the other prosecutor now for right clicking.
Exactly.
It's all part of discovery at this point, right?
Yeah.
Who was the
person?
Who was the first
person who right clicks on there is going to get charged now.
Yep.
Yeah.
That sounds right. That sounds appropriate. Anyway,
such a ridiculous thing, but it was nice to hear that they've like backed off that, because when we had first reported that story, like weeks later, it was like, I mean, our initial response was, this is stupid. Like, why would anyone ever pursue this? Clearly, it's just idiotic. And then they're like, nope, we're still going forward with it. And, it's like, what? But now, fast forward some more, and now they're not going with it. So that's good. Positive outcome.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool.
Any recommendations for Omaha? Is this for chicken fingers in Omaha?
Yeah, Justin commented in the stream that he's down for chicken fingies reviews. So, but along those lines, right? Or I should say, switching topics, right? Mike has been doing a lot on the cloud security side. I think Ken mentioned that as we were jumping into it. I can't remember, Mike. I think, it's been a good year plus since we've had you on the show. You want to give a little bit of what you've been working on lately? I know you and I work together as far as like consultancies goes on the AppSec side of things, but I know you push more into the cloud security side. So just kind of give us a rundown of what you're working on, what you can talk about, and what's been interesting to you in the last little while.
Yeah, cool. We've been doing a lot of right-click assessments. That's been a big winner for us. Yeah, that's been a big thing.
Big research area.
Yeah.
Wait. Yeah. What about the double click assessments? Is there anything there?
People aren't ready for that. People aren't ready for that
Yeah,
yet. That's
too future.
2024. But yeah.
Okay.
No,
okay.
but yeah, spent yeah, we all have done AppSec work together. We worked at a certain company all together, did a lot of AppSec work. The past few years, I've pushed into doing more cloud security, and my company does kind of more cloud security work. Still a decent bit of AppSec. But I've been fortunate to work on some really interesting projects around, it's mostly been enterprises moving to the cloud from data centers, which is, a bundle of fun and a bunch of different challenges. And that's pretty interesting at an enterprise level, seeing the challenges and the way people kind of tackle that. And then the past year or so, I've been working on an infrastructure as code project, which is, I think, it's really interesting seeing a pretty large company, do this like massive migration from how they used to do things in the cloud to a new way. And it's rebuilding all the compliance, all the security into a new system, and trying to do it while enabling developers to have a lot more freedom. So I think it's something we're going to see in more enterprises. They've gone from like adopting a very strict way of doing cloud to now kind of loosening it up more to let people have more flexibility over things. So I've been working on that, basically a huge Terraform project, and that's really interesting. And I've been able to work with a couple of companies that are doing those types of engagements, or those types of projects. And it's pretty cool. It's a mix of AppSec work, because you're actually reviewing code of how they're building stuff out, with like infrastructure work and compliance and tons and tons of cloud. So it's a pretty interesting kind of place to play at. And it's cool to see it being done not at like a startup, but actually a huge enterprise. It's slow going at times, but it's interesting to see that, since it's not just startups adopting multi-cloud and Terraform and all that kind of stuff. So that's been really interesting, and I think it's what a lot of people are going to end up doing in the next couple of years as they adopt more cloud. So it's been pretty cool.
Are you engaged by, like, who usually engages? Is it the security team that reaches out to you, or is it like engineering, or is it sort of like what drives the basically, hey, I need someone to come in and help us, and also, like, is it reviewing design or helping out with the design plans, reviewing configs?
It's basically all of it, because it's all of that. I mean, it's usually an engineering team that's leading the effort, and then security hopefully is plugged in at some point to give their input. It really depends on the organization how plugged in security is. Like everything, sometimes security gets brought in at the last minute to try to kind of plug the holes. But the project I've worked on security has been involved pretty early on, so that's been a huge bonus to kind of do secure design from the get-go. So it's how do you adopt any service in AWS or Azure, and how do you do it securely? So that's everything from architecture to how things are rolled out to identity, everything. So it's pretty interesting. You're starting with like the basic building blocks of using cloud and building security on top of it. So
So, I mean, have you found that, I mean, there's been an influx of tools from a, Terraform perspective, or almost like a static analysis perspective for the infrastructure as code stuff. Have you found that to be useful? Is it, or is it so custom that it's not worth even addressing or even using?
Yeah, there's a couple. I think it's a pretty interesting challenge, because it's almost like the build time versus runtime kind of review of an app. There's different things you're going to see depending on where you're doing that evaluation. So with Terraform, there's a big pre-application. It does the planning. It says this is what the end result's going to look like. So you get some idea of what you're kind of getting. But it's not until you actually apply that you actually know what the running state's going to be like. And these tools, they're static analysis tools, and most of them are, very simple rules. They're not even doing source to sink type of flow analysis. They're just looking for certain fields and checking the checking the parameter that is being set. So you get into interesting situations where like you can check for really basic stuff, like is something encrypted or something named right. But then when you get into complex relationships, like, are there two different databases deployed out? Because if one thing's deployed out in a different workspace or in a different kind of Terraform stack, but there's a relationship between those two things, how do you sync those two things up together? So it's basically like you have a static analysis tool that also has to analyze some state, and that's kind of a new thing to dig into that I don't feel like we do in AppSec that well. So it's interesting in that way.
No, I mean, I would agree, because I mean, it always falls back to that kind of the idea of the integration testing or the unit testing that QA has done for years, but in AppSec we've almost ignored it, right? That we've got these powerful tools or powerful ways of validating, in this case, like infrastructure, but it takes actually putting that state into place to check to see what's happening. That's interesting. So are there any tools that you would recommend? Anything that's, that has been helpful that we could, just list along with the show notes?
Yeah, I mean, I think the two big ones, TFSec for Terraform is the big one, and then actually SemGrep. I think for most folks, if you're moving into Terraform or some other infrastructure as code, like just start using SemGrep to write out the basic rules that you need, because you can get into very crazy, like HashiCorp has its own language they built out, which has a lot of drawbacks, but you can get into like much more in-depth kind of checks that do different, like looking at the state, looking at the plan, looking at before changes, after changes, all that kind of stuff. But I think for a lot of folks, just dealing with the basics, like SemGrep is a good place to start, because you can write rules so fast and they're pretty easy to understand what they're doing. But then you get into more complex use cases and it's just not gonna work for you that well. Mm-hmm. But I think being able to tie things together in some form of a relationship is really the tricky part to all of it. So I think it's like a different like paradigm that we haven't found the right tool for yet, because you're doing static analysis plus looking at live analysis of an environment. So I don't think anything like hits the mark completely, but some of these tools at least get you the basics. So.
Yeah, by the way, I have to agree. I think in terms of simplicity, like SemGrep and I know because I work for GitHub, I probably should be touting the CodeQL route, but I think for simplicity's sake, if you're like just trying to create rules, quickly, I think it makes it super easy to create those rules. And then in terms of like, deploying it runs real quick. It's super easy to like and intuitive to use. Like it's not, frankly, it's just an easy way to get set up pretty quickly. So it's interesting though, using that in a infrastructure as code. Well, that's what it sounds like anyways, kind of reviewing configs, infrastructure as code, maybe use that for Terraform, or is it just exclusively like TFSec, or is it a combination of the two?
No, you can use it on Terraform as well. They have a whole rule set for Terraform and SemGrep. So the open source one, I don't think is that built out, but I'm sure people do have pretty big rule sets they've built out that maybe haven't been shared yet. We're actually thinking about it on one of the projects, using it in addition to the actual tool from HashiCorp to just have an additional layer of things to check for certain patterns. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. I mean, yeah, I think the thing is, like, with our industry, we went to, let's build like the best mousetrap. Let's build like the most complex solution that does like everything super well. And then everyone's like, I don't know how this works. This takes too long to run. This like gives me garbage results, or it's just super complicated. And that's why like SemGrep has gotten so popular, is because it's just like simple and it works. And so I think for most folks, start with the easy solution versus the like perfect solution. So I've had quite a few clients that are like, yeah, we bought some tool, we haven't set it up, no one runs it, no one looks at the results, can you help us with that? So like that's the problem with security tools. So
Are there any common like sort of mistakes that you see people, commonalities in sort of maybe misconfiguring or things or introducing sort of like, flaws in general? Any common trends that you kind of see and can speak to would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think I work with like large enterprises and then some smaller companies, and we do a lot of cloud assessments. And I'd say like people are getting good at the basics. Some things in the cloud are so easy. Like you just turn on encryption by clicking a button or just like having a field set to true. It's not complex. Now you can argue how much security that really gives you, since it's just server-side encryption in AWS and how many people have access to their servers. But so people are getting better about that. I think it's still IEM is probably the biggest issue, either over provisioning policies, giving too many permissions, not cleaning things up. I mean, like every company we go into and do an assessment, they have like old admin accounts with super old keys, super old passwords, or just, people who don't work at the company anymore still sitting in their cloud account. And that's been true at small companies. That's been true at big companies. I worked with a company that an intern left the company and then still had access to an enterprise account that they just started running Bitcoin miners in. So
fun.
Yeah. That's like the basic stuff still isn't done all that well. So
one thing you kind of pointed to though, or you kind of mentioned there, was that it's like, yeah, you can easily configure, ACL rules, or you can turn something on or off encryption wise or whatever. But I think, and this is where I'm curious if, folks ask you to do this, is that when you start to take the entirety into perspective and you look at like the threat model and start delving into like risks, and you start thinking of the security of those assets within like the cloud infrastructure and taking a layered approach to the security of those assets, like that's where I think it gets very nuanced, right? Like I would imagine anyways, where you're like, this service has access to this. And if, for instance, this one machine is compromised and it has like whatever the V1 is of like IMS or whatever it is. IMDS, yeah. Then like, okay, maybe they can do some SSRF stuff to grab credentials and pivot throughout. And then like, yeah, I guess it's just a matter of, well, I guess so just taking that and making it succinct and not just all over the place. Do people engage you for a threat model / sort of design risk-based or risk-focused design discussion? And if so, how difficult does that get at like an enterprise scale? I imagine it's complex.
Yeah, I think it's people do that. Usually we include it in kind of like an architecture review because most people are doing apps and putting them in the cloud. So kind of there's like cloud and AppSec are so intertwined because you're using cloud services as part of your app, and you don't even, you're not writing a custom queuing service. You're just going to use like SQS. And so the integration with that is just built into your code. So everything is kind of a mix of AppSec and cloudsec. And so when we do architecture reviews, we also have to look at those kinds of things of like, how are these services that you're setting up built? Like, what is the baseline used to secure them? All those kinds of things. So there's definitely a mix of kind of the infrastructure and the application that's happening more and more, I think. And I do think like AppSec is going to kind of blend in with cloud security or vice versa. I think it's like those two skill sets, I think, are there's going to be a lot of overlap because it's all like everything is basically data and everything is code these days. So yeah, that happens pretty often. But I think the hardest thing is like what people don't think about when they use the cloud is like what their strategy is. Like they tackle it piece by piece. They're like, okay, we need to use this service. Okay, so what's our key management strategy? What's our IEM strategy? What's our like patch management strategy? And all of that stuff is technically easy to do in the cloud. Like you can automate so much of it. You can have integration with like with an IDP to manage users and things like that. But people just don't think about it until they're like deep into their cloud usage. And at that point, it's such a pain to kind of roll things back. or they've been breached because they don't do a good job of managing these things. So Ken Toller and I do a talk, and that's one of the things that I talk about is like security needs to have a strategy, and it has to be part of the like enterprise cloud strategy for how you do all these things, because it all has to be automated. You can't manually manage everything, and there has to be like a full strategy that involves everyone from user onboarding to accounting to like data management, all that stuff together. And security is just one piece of it, but I don't think people kind of have that. They just adopt these services because it's convenient, it's easy to get going, but they don't think kind of through the whole long-term strategy of how they're going to use it. But that's probably true in a lot of different areas.
I mean, I like part of me understands from a skunkworks perspective, right? Like most of the cloud in large environments popped up because some group decided, hey, we're going to use this because, yeah, we can go roll out an EC2 instance that's only going to cost us, $10 a month. No one's going to question that charge, and we're just going to get off and running. We don't have to involve IT. So I understand how it's come about. And then also from a startup perspective, I mean, it's very rare that I run into somebody that even has like a coding standard when we walk into a startup, right? So the same thing's going to apply to the cloud. Is they just like, well, how do we do this? And they go check AWS docs or Azure docs and stand up an instance and move. So, I mean, I guess all I'm saying is I don't see it going away anytime soon. Or being solved, right? Like, without
for what it's worth. I was going to add that our teams, to Mike's point, are focused on learning more about cloud providers. Obviously, Azure's at the top of the list there for us, but we're having to learn. To your point about AppSec, sort of it blending with AppSec, having the cloud services. Yeah, absolutely. That's becoming more of a thing, especially as we delve into threat models around applications and how they're all architected. That's where I think it really comes into play to even just like the fundamentals of what service does what, let alone like the intricacies of how you could, change configuration options around and what's the best way to do this or that. Just even knowing what those services are. And what they do, are pretty critical, I think. Or like, what are the major pitfalls too, right? We want to use blob storage. Okay, is it like susceptible to certain things the same way S3 is in AWS? Things like that. Yeah, they come into play.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think companies are slowly. I mean, it depends on the company, but I think they're getting to the point where it's like, okay, we have an AppSec pipeline to run our tools against our code. Let's have a pipeline to run against our infrastructure as code. And you're going to have the same concerns. Like you're going to have a good rule set that protects you without making a dev's life terrible. And that's the tricky balance. I mean, that's always been true in security, but yeah, when you're running like a huge enterprise pipeline and you have you give people a lot of permissions to build things the way they want, you have to have a pretty good set of rules in place to make sure they're not doing the wrong thing, it's tough. Like it's not an easy thing to do right all the time. So it's a big challenge, but I think there's a big opportunity there too, because you can give developers flexibility and you can have like pretty high fidelity rules that are good at catching these things and not throwing up a bunch of false positives. The hardest part, I think, is defining your kind of the way you want to adopt things. So like what the platform is going to look like, what the patterns are going to look like for the different patterns, defining that, and then making sure it's like flexible enough and gives people what they want from a service without making it insecure. That's like the constant push and pull between security and devs, I think, in the cloud world.
Since you mentioned you work with enterprises a lot, I assume compliance standards come into play here. So I guess I'm curious if you've ever seen compliance standards negatively impact design decisions or positively impact design decisions, or if it's just sort of been like, well, we're going to do what we do and we just make sure it falls in line with that. But yeah, I'm always curious how compliance, things like FedRAMP, things like, SOC 2, things like that. Like, how does it impact? How does it influence choices in the cloud, especially for enterprises that are like really, so you mentioned access control, right? Like, that's obviously a critical component of most compliance certifications, is like, do you have a good revocation story? Can you point to examples of it? Things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it definitely does. I mean, the companies that I've worked with are enterprise financials, so big banks or kind of mortgage companies, things like that. And so they're highly regulated, so everything has to be built out to meet those regulations. And yeah, I mean, it definitely, it can have a big impact in how you have to design things, which can have kind of an overall bad ramification. I mean, access management is still kind of the biggest thing, and identity and who can access what. So going from like a free for all where everyone has access to just like an account to strong vertical segmentation so that people can't access kind of different services someone else is using. That's a pretty big piece of it. Because then you get into like some data is PCI or some services are PCI, but some aren't. Those can't touch. Some is, highly protected data, and that can't, touch like an application team that runs like a public app can't touch that data, kind of thing. So like there's all those kinds of like strong vertical segmentation you have to build out, which definitely makes things much less flexible for people adopting the services, because you have to stay within those guardrails. So I wouldn't say it's always a bad thing, like a bad design, but it definitely adds much more structure, which I'm sure a developer would be like, this is such a pain to like, make sure I have all these things built out the way that this tool assumes that I have to build it out. But yeah, that's just the reality of highly regulated companies, is you're not getting around all of it. So
I'm sure it introduces cost too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's some things you can abstract away, but not everything. So
interesting.
so yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. I mean,
Like,
the more you can
go ahead.
automate that stuff, the more you automate that stuff. Like if you just give someone, that's what I mean when I say like patterns. If you just say like, this is how you adopt S3 versus like, okay, I'm going to try this. Oh, that didn't work. I'm going to try this. That didn't work. That kind of thing. Like that makes it easier for developers to adopt services without just stepping on rakes all the time. So
yeah, I mean, and that's having the guardrails in place is super important, like for anything that we do, right? But then I always struggle. I always go back to that kind of chicken and egg problem when it comes to putting those guardrails in place, because your understanding of S3 or blob storage is going to affect like what guardrails you can actually build out. And if you don't have somebody on staff, or you don't have a consultant that's queued up for you, how do you actually start, right? Like where is it that you turn to for that sort of a that sort of a take, or that sort of a configuration? Since I mean, if you looked at the AWS documentation or the Azure documentation, it's very much like developer documentation, as far as, hey, if you want to do X, go forth and implement this. But it doesn't necessarily put into place if you want it encrypted, set this flag, or you want to restrict data access, set this flag, right? That kind of thing. So I guess my question then is, where does someone at a startup or a consultant that doesn't know anything about cloud security, where do they start?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest problem with any of these like benchmarks is they quickly become out of date. Like it drives me crazy where you have like CIS, which they're pretty in-depth benchmarks. Like they'll say click this button or like set this field to be whatever. But especially with Azure, within like 6 months, it's out of date. Like Azure will rename some service completely different, and the API will change, and you just can't do what this benchmark is telling you to do. So they're good from a pretty low level, but the only problem with low level is if things change, it like doesn't work anymore. So I'd say those are a place to start. They also, like if you take we've been using the EKS benchmark from AWS, and it's good, but it's so kind of wide that it like touches on things that either you don't care about or you deal with some other direction or some other way. And so it's just such a big document, and they're trying to cover all their bases that it's not gonna just cover all the things that you just really need to care about. It's going to cover so many other things too. So I think a combination of like CIS, CSA has their whole cloud security matrix, which is still a little higher level. It's not to like the API documentation level. And then just AWS benchmarks, like you can get most of the way there, but unfortunately it's not like, here's the 10 things you have to worry about. Just do these 10 things and you're good to go. So
there's no OWASP for cloud security. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I mean, there are different cheat sheets out there and stuff like that, but yeah, I mean, I don't think the problem is one size doesn't fit all for this stuff. So you're always going to have to adopt and adapt different pieces of different programs. So it's just kind of tough.
So there's no easy button. Okay, well, screw it. I don't want to know any more than.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you use machine learning, and you feed the PCI standard into machine learning, and yeah, that solves everything.
Solves everything.
Okay. Come out with the answer 42. That's always the answer. So if you are a person who wants to get into cloud security, how do you do that? That's actually something I'm always curious about, because, you know, like a lot of us who I shouldn't put myself in that category anymore, but at one point I knew a bit about cloud security, and you know, obviously I have the AppSec background, but also I think knowing networking helped a lot too, like knowing the fundamentals of, you know, the OSI layer, networking, all that fun stuff, just having that background. So I'm curious, I guess, what is the background that makes sense? What things, like, how would a person, you know, get into this? I would assume, obviously, learning about the services is a start, but you know, what other, like, I know flaws, what is it, flaws.cloud or something like that?
Flaws.cloud. Yep. Scott Piper.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, what resources are available, thing, you know, generally.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I would say this to AppSec people too, like the best way to start learning is just to start building stuff out. Like, you know, start setting up EC2, start setting up networks, build out multiple accounts, you know, figure out how networking works between things, set up, you know, data movement, kind of operations, like all those kinds of things. Just start using different services, which can get pretty expensive kind of quickly if you're on a budget. But, you know, if you try to stick to the free tier of things and not turn on any crazy expensive services, you can do it without charging too much. But I'd say just, start building stuff out. There's no better way to learn than just jumping in and starting to set up services, and then tear everything down and get charged 15 cents a month by AWS for some random KMS queue that's sitting somewhere.
Yeah.
Swear to God, I have one account that charges me like $3 a month, and I can't figure out why.
I have a 51-cent charge every month.
Yeah, I will find you. Random service. But yeah, I think that's probably the best way. And I mean, I think because cloud combines everything together, like there's a networking component, there's an app component, there's you know, a strong API component. Like no matter what background you come from, you'll bring a strength to it, and you'll just have to fill the gaps in the other areas. You know, I came from an app background, so understanding like application stacks was easy for me, but like the networking stuff, you have to learn more on that side. Identity stuff, you know, if you come from an identity background, you'll pick that up, and you might have to learn other areas. So I think any background works. I think you just have to learn in the other areas you're not as strong in. But I don't think it's one size fits all. I think you can take whatever skills you have and just pick up the other pieces.
You know, it's funny. I say the same thing for learning like AppSec. You know, you said it. I mean, you build something, and then that is how you learn. I mean, I've had people who ask me, you know, not even about AppSec, just programming. I'm like, well, the best way to learn to program is to have a purpose, something you want to build specifically, and then just
Yeah.
go and do it. And even if you don't finish, like the pitfalls that you run into, the questions that come up, the Stack Overflow pages you visit, all of that stuff chalks up to like, okay, I didn't know a whole lot in the beginning, but now, it doesn't take long. If you work on a project for say 8 hours, even, to me, that's better than sitting in a classroom for, a week or whatever. So
Yeah.
it makes sense that you say that you should just pretty much have something to build and go into the cloud provider and start building it, the cloud provider of your choice, and start building it. And actually, that's another question. Is there anything you would would you start with? Well, I guess you'd probably be biased towards AWS, but I guess, does it matter if, it's just any Azure, AWS? Is there somebody's trying to learn more about cloud security? Is there more demand that you see in one other than the other?
I mean, I think most smaller companies generally start with AWS, but enterprises, I think these days, are split between AWS and Azure. A lot of folks, enterprises, are using, from what I've seen from the people I've worked with, they use AWS for workloads and they use Azure for identity and like Azure AD, and they'll slowly adopt some of the other services. I actually see quite a few people use like a runtime service in AWS to actually host their applications, and then use like artificial intelligence services in Azure to do some work, and then just pass things back and forth. So there's more. I don't want to call it multi-cloud, since it's not like you have the same workload in multiple places, but there's more like integration between these different pieces. I see these days. I think AWS is, like, their documentation is solid. I think their services are pretty easy to understand for the most part. I think Azure gives you kind of the easy button, but I don't think it tells you. I don't think you learn much. I don't think you learn as much about how things actually work under the hood with Azure. That's just my experience. Other people might think differently. Everyone has their own favorite cloud. I told it Azure, so Ken left.
Yeah, exactly. You said AWS. Now that he's a Microsoftie, right? Like that's
Let's go get another Microsoft tattoo.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I mean, along those lines, though, are you seeing rise of any other sorts of, like, any other cloud providers, right? Like I know that I run into people that are using sales, like, I mean, they call it Salesforce Cloud, right? But definitely like Salesforce services, or but even some of the like rack spaces, DigitalOcean's, GCP, right? Like, obviously that's, we have our own opinions about GCP, right? Google Cloud Platform. But are you seeing any others that are up and coming that may be more interesting to you, or is it just, Azure and AWS?
I'd say a majority is those two. I mean, every large company has a gajillion cloud providers. Like, everyone uses Salesforce. Everyone uses a million different cloud hosted, SaaS products. That's like, I think that's a source of major shadow IT, is just people, spinning up if it's $200 a month, they throw it on their corporate card and it never gets picked up by anyone in IT.
Yep.
Yeah, that's like a huge amount of services that are being used that might never get onboarded to like an enterprise cloud program. And those are also very different, because you're very limited to what they offer in terms of integrations for logging and identity and things like that. I mean, there's all these services out there just to integrate with those services to give you the actual security features that you want. All the CASB offerings to secure Salesforce or other SaaS products. So I think that's becoming kind of a niche area of security itself, where people are becoming experts in Salesforce and Salesforce security and how to manage things like that. I haven't done a huge amount of work in that area, just because I feel like you don't get to the interesting building blocks with those cloud providers. They're they're not as low level, but there's a huge amount of work to be done there. I mean, all those things have so much data in them. So that's where people really should take more time to understand how it's being secured and make sure it actually is being secured. So,
I mean, I think your statement earlier on in the discussion about how cloud and AppSec are, will continue to kind of combine. is appropriate because of that case, right? Like we have SDKs, other things like other apps that we've used back in the past that, they slowly, like we understand them more and more. There's more attacks that happen against them, but there's also more security controls that are built around them as we understand what they are. And the same goes for the cloud. And we're using those cloud components now within applications, right? Like I run into applications all the time that are using something like, the business intelligence tools from Azure, right? Like, and they're pulling data back, and the protections there could be weak because it's, it was just, again, an IT or a skunkworks project that somebody rolled out. So I think it's appropriate. It's just it becomes again more of this kind of asset classification or knowing what's actually running within your environment or within your cloud spaces that is a problem, that we just don't know what we don't know, right?
Yeah,
and that's
definitely tricky.
Ken's now at the spa, so just don't worry about him.
The spa? Is that what it looks like? I am outside.
Yeah, you're outside.
And it's rainy and gross. But I had to let some contractors into my office temporarily. So, but was listening along, following along. So no spa though.
I know. No spa. Oh, dang.
No spa. Maybe in Omaha. Maybe there's maybe at the embassy suites in Omaha. There's some kick-ass.
You have the hot tub in the middle of the room. That'd be pretty sweet. Bed, toilet, hot tub.
Hot tub. Yeah. It's a suite.
Embassy suites rocks. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's an embassy level suite. So, I mean, truly, it should have. Actually, it's funny you say that. Brief aside, I was in Ohio last weekend, another glamorous location. Shout out to Ohio. But I was in Ohio, and we were at this some hotel, and they had a little jacuzzi, and it was, figured nobody'd be there. Nobody was when we went in there. And then all of a sudden, we were just, as a family, just sitting in the jacuzzi. 5 people come in there, and this is a tiny, tiny, tiny jacuzzi, like a bathtub, basically, right? And they're just like, they just hop right in, like, and there's an open pool right next to it. They're just like, hop right in, and they're just like, hey, what's up? I was like, is this happening? Is this something that's happening right now? This doesn't make you uncomfortable, 5 random strangers? Because I'm definitely uncomfortable. We're touching toes. Like, this is not an ideal scenario. So I don't want to touch your knees.
It's family style hot tub, just everyone digs in. Yeah.
There's some weird people out there. Anyways, don't know how that plays a part in cloud security, but now everybody knows that story. So there you go.
Yeah.
You don't want your clouds touching? I don't know, something.
No clouds touching.
No clouds touching.
So trends. What trends do you expect? I was curious about this one. Like what, because for there felt like for like a, I don't know, 3-year, 4-year time span, the big trend was, 2 big trends were stealing data from S3, like just poorly, written policies, or for whatever reason, S3 buckets being exposed. And the other one was, crypto mining in cloud providers through stolen keys. And I think there's been at least some attempt on certain platforms to, revoke accidentally committed keys or accidentally uploaded keys. And maybe that's helped, maybe it hasn't. I'm not sure if those attacks are still the big ones that you happen to see these days on, like, we'll just stick with AWS for now. But yeah, I'm curious if there are any newer trends, new patterns of attacks, or if it's still just like people, posting keys, posting credentials, and that being the way in, or what?
I think that's still going to happen. I think there's more, GitHub did the whole thing where it's like searching for keys for common cloud providers and then reaching out to get those shut down. And actually, GuardDuty has a new finding where if your temporary STS tokens are used from a different AWS account that's not part of your organization, it'll actually flag that, which is pretty cool. So if someone uses SSRF to get temporary tokens and they use it from their own account versus one of your accounts,
it'll be flagged. So that's a pretty good in-depth finding for someone abusing something like that. So, but I think, yeah, that's still going to happen. Like people can just go low and slow with discovered credentials. I mean, there's more awareness of that. So I think that probably happens less, and people have learned to use, temporary credentials versus just hard coding credentials into everything. So I think that's getting better. But I think actually one area that is really difficult to tackle, and I've had different clients deal with this, is kind of the insider threat from a cloud perspective. Like people do, enterprises do crazy things where they're, everything's going in and out of a single ingress egress point. They're doing, tons of cloud monitoring. They're doing all this stuff in the cloud to secure things. But it's really difficult to say, is this developer who has access to a database just uploading a database export into their personal S3? Because it's hard to keep track of, like, is this S3 bucket owned by the organization that they're talking to? And you can't really shut down access to AWS for like developers. So I think exfiltration via the cloud is a big issue that hasn't been completely solved. And I've worked on some projects around that are like tying disparate data together to try to get some kind of idea of what an inventory looks like to prevent that kind of thing. But it's still pretty hard. And that's all because, AWS is on a common namespace URL. So you can't just block out, some other company's namespace in AWS. So I think that's kind of an interesting area. And there's so many, like the cloud is a perfect avenue to use for exfiltration because there's just so many ways you can do it. Depending on the rights you have, you can just dump it to your own services. You can use, like replication policies to move data around. You can have open queues, like a million different ways you can do it. So I think that's an issue. I'm not sure how big, insider threat, I think is usually a smaller percentage of attacks, but still pretty significant. So I think that's going to be an area that cloud platforms are going to have to do a better job of kind of giving people the ability to lock that down, and people just have to think through how to handle those kinds of issues. But otherwise, I'm sure it's going to be, badly written applications that lead to, grabbing credentials and then using that to either do crypto mining or just stealing data or just doing damage to cloud accounts. I think that's still going to be a huge source of issues. But yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. Sorry, Seth, were you going to say something?
No, I mean, yeah, like the exfiltration stuff is not something that I've spent a lot of time, or I have not spent a lot of time thinking about, but I can see it being a massive problem, right? Yeah.
I actually have a question around that.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Well, no, I mean, I'm just curious, like, obviously exfiltration, oftentimes we kind of rely on certain alerts, and I know there's like CloudTrail for logging, and then that you can feed that into like a SIM or something, or CloudWatch for specific types of alarms. But I'm curious, like, are people typically aggregating especially I would imagine the enterprise, are they just aggregating their CloudTrail logs and then setting up rules in a SIM, or are they just like relying more heavily on AWS to provide alert notifications and configuring with like specific CloudWatch alarms or specific rules, or just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think the common enterprise process or pattern is to dump everything out to S3, and then some kind of SIEM picks it up and ingest it. So you'll have Splunk that's just pulling a ton of CloudTrail logs. But the big problem is, and this is, I think everyone who has a SIEM should do this experiment, like do some kind of action in AWS. It takes like 15 minutes to hit S3 from CloudTrail, and then your SIEM will ingest it, hopefully real time. And then how much time between it ingesting it and it hitting the alert does someone actually get notified to something? Because there's like, I worked on projects where there's a huge amount of time between when something happens. And I mean, by huge, I mean like
30 minutes, but that's more than enough time if someone has access to your account to do some serious damage. So like with all these different integrations from going from CloudTrail to S3 to your SIEM to, alerting to the ticket system that actually opens up a ticket so a SOC analyst can look at something, like how much time is that taking before someone actually looks at an issue and starts trying to fix it? But that's usually the common pattern. Some people do, a lot of people use a cloud tool that will give them alerts based on what's happening in CloudTrail. And then there's things like AWS config that you can set up alerts for. There's GuardDuty, which just looks at CloudTrail and other sources of data and gives you alerts. But most of these things still get funneled back to like some kind of SIEM or some SOC, and then they have to actually action on those things. And I haven't seen too many great examples of SOCs that are very cloud native, that know how to kind of take these findings and figure out how to solve them very quickly. I have seen some cases where like operations teams, cloud operation teams, they work with the SOC and they actually have the ability to go in and fix things very quickly. But I think it's it's kind of an upskilling thing where SOC analysts have to go from looking at endpoint logs, looking at what's happening there, to understanding, CloudTrail and what those actions mean. So I answered a different question than you asked, but related.
No, you did actually, and I think it brings up a good point of having a pretty flexible, pretty robust response plan in advance. Like, going back to the original beginning of this discussion, you had mentioned, it's a shift from a data center to the cloud, and in a data center, you have people physically on site. There's pros and cons to both for sure. But the pro being there is that like I said, you have people on site. You're in the driver's seat. You're in total control, unless you're, leasing maybe a part of a data center, but otherwise, you're in control. Whereas this is very much like, there's no centralized, other than AWS, I suppose, there's no centralized sort of entity that belongs to your company, physically managing the servers. And so then, it comes down to like, if something I feel like you have to plan for things to go wrong, because it probably will. And then, but you better have like a quick response plan and like have tabletopped quite a few scenarios, anything from the easy stuff like exposure of keys or whatever to like somebody's pivoting throughout the network and we have no idea how they got in, and then you start looking at like, oh, was it an app that was compromised, and like what services did it have access to? And anyways, like I do think it just points out the need for a really good story going into it rather than after the fact, especially if you're an enterprise.
Yeah, like if you see someone who's using compromised keys, like who's the person who's going to set up an IAM policy to block that session from those keys? Like there's no like easy button you just click to kill access. Like you can kill the keys, but then the session might still live. And so like that's kind of the information and the integration you need to have from someone like a SOC to a cloud operations team. So yeah, it's pretty tricky. I think there's the cool thing, and I've seen, Cap One is a big proponent of this, but they have their open source tool, Cloud Custodian, which is like it can be very aggressive to go out and fix things immediately. And so you can set up rules to just like shut down misconfigurations right away. So I think that's not a model that I've seen adopted widely. But I think that's the way we should go is, you have your alerts, you have your SOC that looks at those. But for really egregious things, an open S3 bucket or, keys that are going crazy, something like that, you just have automation that shuts that down. So I think that's an area where the cloud is a really big opportunity, I think, that you can automate all this stuff. You can try to prevent it the best you can with things like infrastructure as code, security, and you can do really good alerting on things, but then you can actually have automation go out and fix stuff for you. But you have to be a little brave to allow automation to have that kind of access, because we all know the smallest mistake and it can bring stuff down. So
yeah, that's why I'm like, I feel like even with everything being heavily automated, I would feel comfortable with having a team 24/7, somebody to respond. and with manual intervention, just because like no matter what you automate, like you said, even your automation can cause problems. So.
Yeah. I think it was, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think it was Slack that actually had some cool automation where it would alert the like owner of the keys if they were being used to do something suspect on Slack and say like, hey, are you doing this thing? And if not, then you can say no, and it like revokes the keys. I think it was Slack. It was someone who had some pretty interesting automation.
I remember that talk.
Yeah,
yeah,
there was still
Slack,
a human element, but yeah, it was all automated besides that. So I think there's some cool opportunities for that kind of thing.
What? Yeah, I remember that talk, but I'm
Slack Ryan
Huber or something like that. Yeah, no, I think it was they were using like an elk stack for detection, and then like you said, revoking and shutting things. And I like you said, I think they sent a message in Slack, and they required like a duo push that you had to respond to, and then if you respond to that and said it's like either okay or you respond in Slack to whether it was okay or not, and then if you said it was okay, you had to, or even not, you need to like respond with a duo to like make sure that's you that's saying that. That was interesting.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Like if you can have really like high fidelity checks where it's like the only way this is happening is something really bad's going on, I think that's a really cool way of doing it. Otherwise, if it's like every 5 minutes you get pinged on Slack by some automation to be like, hey, are you doing this thing? Like people are just gonna be like, yes, I'm doing this. Or they'll set up a Slack bot to say, yes, I'm doing this. And they'll have their 5-year-old answer their duo push or something like that. But
so we're getting to the tail end of the show. So I want people to actually know your consultancy. Can you actually like put out your consultancy's name, and I'll put out like
we're a stealth mode. We're a stealth mode.
Stealth mode consultancy. Yeah.
I'll put your link in here,
MBM Consultants. mbmconsultants.co. Reach out if you need any AppSec work, or mostly cloud security, infrastructure as code, cloud strategy, all those kinds of things we've been working on for a number of years now. So can help in quite a few different areas that.
I was going to ask, what's your OnlyFans page for MBM?
Tragically pale, tragically pale on.
Ken asking the real questions.
For real questions. Do you have a Twitter account for MBM?
No, just my own, McCabe 615.
Okay. I'll put yours out right now.
Cool.
They can DM you with their questions about your OnlyFans page and other cloud security topics.
Yeah, it's 99 cents per answer, just FYI. So nothing's free.
Nothing's free in life. Yeah. Sweet. So, yeah. Sorry, Seth, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, right, like I do want to be cognizant of everyone's time. We've been going for just over an hour today. Any kind of last minute thoughts, any last minute like recommendations that you have, Mike, before we close it up for today?
I hear the Embassy Suites in Omaha is pretty great.
Pretty sweet. Okay, good. Especially the end of March.
If the spa is rocking.
Find Ken at the hot tub there with a bunch of other people.
By myself with red vines and crying erratically for no reason.
Red wines.
Yeah, just a box of wine.
Yep.
Box of wine, cheap candy, and lots of tears.
Yeah.
That reminds me of the time that we went to CVS, and never mind. Yeah.
When we bought wine. CVS at like midnight with a bottle of wine, some a ton of melatonin for no good reason that we could explain. And like some other weird thing I can't remember. Yeah. The lady just looked at us. And she didn't even let go, too. She wasn't like, she said fun night plan.
No, I will plug Ken Tor and I are doing a podcast on DevSecOps called Relating to DevOps. So check that out. It's on Spotify, the other places. Hopefully we'll have you guys on at some point to talk about your world as well.
Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah, that'd
absolutely.
be awesome. Yep. Yeah, we'll pop that in here. Yeah, I know I've talked with Ken Toller about it a couple of times, so yeah, it'd be good to do some some more interviews both sides. So
Yeah.
great.
You can
So
promote
it's
your
relating to
OnlyFans.
DevSecOps,
Relating to DevOps.
not DevSecOps.
I'll send you the DevSecOps.
Okay.
Relating to the number 2, DevSecOps.
Looking
hip.
forward to seeing you at the Cheesecake Factory as well there, Neil.
Sweet.
So I put your Spotify link in for the podcast so people can go there and just click a link and be open to your podcast.
Sweet.
Awesome. All right. Well, yeah, again, we appreciate the time. We appreciate the thoughts, Mike. We'll catch everybody else online, though. We do have After Dark episodes coming. We're going to be doing a cross promotion with hunter.dev and some of the apps that they are looking at as well. So watch out for that. Yeah. Otherwise, Ken, anything else before we close up for today?
That was actually the thing I was going to mention. So no, all good.
Okay. Sweet.
Yeah.
All right.
All right,
Thanks everybody for joining. We'll talk next week.
Thank you again, Mike.